Adam, thank you for joining me. Of course, we are just days away from Daniel Dubois against Joyce. Certainly one of the most eagerly anticipated fights. We've had to wait a long time for it. You are, of course, a man who was in Joe's corner for a couple of fights. You trained him for a while. What was it that impressed you about Joe, either before you started training him or while you were training him?
Joe's unique, and I'm still trying to put my finger on it, but he is phenomenally strong, just innately strong. It's not necessarily a deadlift or a bench press measurement. He just has this real innate strength and sturdiness about him, and heavy-handedness. And he is deceptively effective with his boxing when he chooses to be. Everybody says that he's easy to hit, but he's just one of those characters that when he does get caught, because of his posture, it stands out a little bit more than it does with other people. But when he chooses to, he's actually very, very effective with his boxing. It might not necessarily look elegant and Cassius Clay-like in its sort of motion and coordination, but he's effective. And he is an absolute handful for anyone in the heavyweight division. It doesn't matter who they are.
So you mentioned that when he chooses to box, he's very good at boxing. So forgive me if I'm being ignorant. Why choose to, if you're saying take punches rather than avoid punches?
I think he has no fear of getting hit and no concern about getting hurt. And so he'll risk someone landing a big shot on him just so he can land his 18 punch salvo that he likes to put together sometimes. Why he's happy to be that way, because he's kind of always been that way. He's always looked a bit disjointed and uncoordinated, but that's just him. That's just his makeup. Every fighter have their own style and their own makeup, their own rhythm, their own internal rhythm. And his is certainly a unique one.
I think that's often, from what you've said, that makes what he does make sense. Whereas I think if you ask people what is Joe's weakness, it is that he gets hit a lot. So if you're saying that's not a weakness, what would you say are the things that you wanted to work on with him, or that he still needs to improve on?
Well, I won't elaborate on the things that we worked on because people will watch this, and I've picked things up about certain opponents in the past, the fighters that I've worked with. So I won't elaborate on too much about Joe because I want to respect the fact that we work together, and we work together quite well. So time will show. Time will show. And this fight next week is really his first acid test as a pro, and it's the perfect opportunity for him to show what he's about.
Fair enough. So I'm going to guess, given that Daniel Dubois hits very hard, you are expecting, therefore, Joe to not take his punches. How that presumably is one of the crucial factors then in this fight, because a lot of people say, well, if Joe can't take Daniel's punches, this is done early. If he can, Joe comes into it late on, or indeed it goes to points.
Yeah, I don't see this fight going to points. And that would be a fair assumption to say that Dubois' best chance of winning the fight is to win it early. And the longer the fight goes, certainly the more the pendulum swings towards Joe.
It seems that you and him parted ways on good terms. He seems to part on good terms with his three coaches, although he's now back with Ismail Salas. Why do you think he's sort of chopped and changed so much? He's only had, not very many fights.
I don't know. That's just his story. There are fighters that do that, and I think he gets a bit restless sometimes. And I think a big part of him wanted to be back in the States where it was sunny and warm, and that obviously couldn't fit with my work agenda because of the other fighters I have in the gym. But I'm not surprised that he parts on good terms with everyone because he is such a lovely fella. He doesn't when outside the ring, if you're not trying to do him wrong, he doesn't have a bad bone in his body.
No, you're certainly right there. Did he? I'm assuming this was a fight that has been on his mind for a long time. I'm assuming it was a fight that you two talked about. Did he seem to relish it more than other fights? Perhaps was he particularly confident? Maybe.
Joe, a lot of people say things like this, but Joe would fight absolutely anyone in the heavyweight division. He would never question it. And so obviously Dubois was one of the main names to come up because they're sort of like a parallel in their trajectory and the timing of their careers. And they've sparred together as well. We talked about it. I asked him about what he felt Dubois was good with when they sparred. And so he knows, he didn't talk Daniel down at any point. He said that he hits very hard, he's very strong, and he takes a good punch as well. And he can box. So he's not going into this fight lying to himself. He knows full well what Dubois brings to the table.
Would it be fair to say there is more scope for Daniel to improve on what we've seen of him so far than there is for Joe?
Well, I don't know, because when you look at all of Daniel's fights, it's been very much the same thing over and over again. Sort of that great balanced position with his legs, the big jab, the big right hand, the big left hook, and just looking to get rid of people as early as possible. And if you look at the sequences of his punches and the pattern of his movements in all of his fights, because obviously when I was working with Joe, I was watching Daniel, and there's certainly a lot of repetition in what he does. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing for him, because he's going to master those elements. In this fight next week, it's if those elements don't work for him, will he be able to adapt and do something different if what has worked from every fight up until now doesn't work from against Joe?
Does it come down to the fact that he's either done the same thing because that's all he can do, or maybe that's just all he's had to do?
Absolutely. You mean, like I said, and very similar to Joe as well. You don't know until fighters get tested under the spotlights if they can make the adaptations needed to be a successful world champion. Because at some point in your career, you're going to get tested. What you're trying to do isn't working, and you have to find different routes at different points in different fights. That's always been the question of fighters as they've gone through their career. What I'm saying is, this is certainly the first time I think that potentially Daniel's going to be asked questions that he hasn't been asked as a pro so far.
Does your instinct and the sort of years of watching fights tell you one way whether he may or may not be able to adapt?
No, I've kind of taught myself to never say never and never assume, and to judge everything when it's over and done with, because there are certain development stage of the fighters that I've worked with where in some fights they've looked absolutely terrible or been dropped, but they've gone on to become successful world champion, and it's just part of the journey. So no, I certainly wouldn't be foolish enough to make any presumptions that he can or can't develop.
I know you've had history with Joe, so this is probably I don't know if it's a silly question, maybe a difficult question, but if you had no prior experience with either man, whose corner would you rather be in on Saturday night?
Well, I mean, as a coach, what I will say is that you can only strategize based on the skill sets that a fighter's got. If you don't know the skill sets and more essentially the weaknesses, you can't necessarily formulate a strategy you think will be most effective for them to win the fight, whilst giving away as few opportunities for the other dude to have success. So without knowing the fighters, I can't say that. If you're saying looking from the outside in, which one would you choose? I'd honestly say it's a 50-50 fight. I said this young fella's looked impressive in every single one of his fights, but he's never been tested yet. And this fella is proven as an international amateur. And yes, he gets caught, but is freakishly heavy-handed. So if I looked at it from the outside, I say it's a 50-50 fight.
Okay, going on from that then, if you're looking at it from the outside, how do you expect the first few rounds to go?
Relatively cautious, maybe not with a lot of action, but with a lot of tension. And I do think that it's going to be a big part of it is going to be who manages to land something significant first and then how the reaction is to that. Because once one of them lands something significant, both of them are then at risk.
Joe doesn't strike me as somebody who would get drawn into a firefight, without choosing to. Maybe Daniel, being a younger man, suddenly might be involved in something he's not seen before, which we've kind of touched on. But Joe strikes me as someone who can maintain his composure for as long as he needs to.
Joe doesn't react emotionally. Joe has no emotion when he's in there. I have seen Dubois react emotionally on a couple of occasions, and very effectively as well. And that doesn't mean that's not a bad thing. There's a lot of great fighters over the years that fought with intense emotion. But Joe doesn't fight emotionally. He just fights with his own rhythm and his own heavy-handedness. And I think that when somebody puts danger in front of Joe or tries to hurt Joe, he punches harder. That's what I've noticed every time I've seen him box and every time I've seen him spar. But if you take it easy with him, he'll sort of sleep along with you. But as soon as you try and hurt him, he then ups his game. And what I noticed in the gym during sparring is that I watched some sparring sessions and I'll be looking, I'm thinking, what is he doing? I'm just not getting this. And then all of a sudden the fella might get a bit fresh and start to put it on Joe a little bit, and then you immediately see what Joe's about. And I've seen it a few times in sparring where some good fighters have put it on him, and as soon as they have done, within 20 seconds, they're in a submissive position somewhere in the ring because Joe's literally put a heavy-handed salvo on him.
Were there any types of fighters who gave Joe more trouble than others?
I'll keep that to myself. Styles make fights.
I thought you might say that. Is this? There's obviously a large age gap in this. If Daniel was to lose, he has plenty of time to come again, as I say. For Joe at 35, which being a heavyweight is not as bad as it might be for a lighter weight. But is there a way back if he doesn't win this fight?
Well, you never know. I mean, there's a manner of defeat, isn't there? If it's a fight where it's an up and down affair both ways, and then one man just happens to manage to come out on top at the end of it. It was a 50-50 fight coming in and a 51-49 fight going out. Fights like that can have rematches. And like I've said before, I've seen fighters in positions where you think, well, there's no point in them carrying on. And the next thing you know, little time down the line, they've won a world title. So it's that thing again, I'm not going to try and shoot. Now, at the age of 35, he has less time to come back from a loss, but it doesn't mean he can't.
And just finally, before you go, would I be fair in saying that this has not been a great year for you in terms of, from a training perspective? Josh Kelly hasn't managed to get out again, and Michael Conlon now injured until next year. Very frustrating for you?
Well, it's funny actually, because the development and improvement in Michael this year has been phenomenal. I think his fight got pulled, didn't it, the day before the fight in March? So we'd had a complete training camp, and that was an incredible training camp where his development and his progress left me believing that he was ready for a world title. Then he got the fight, he got the little workout in August in London at York Hall. Had a nice little workout there. Josh Kelly's fight again fell through. I think it was a couple of weeks after Michael's, but we've had a lot of time in the gym with no pressure of actually fight prep, just to take time and develop things. So obviously we don't have, the actual business end of it where the fight took place and they win, they get paid and they move on and the momentum in their career develops. But that's the same for everyone out there. But we've actually had a very good year in the gym in terms of just development and the work we've had the time and luxury to do. And I'm looking forward to Josh's fight. Josh is going to be training over Christmas and New Year because his fight will be towards the end of January. And I'm expecting Michael to be ready to fight around the start of February. But because that's not far from St. Patrick's Day, I'd imagine that we'll wait until March.
Perfect. Well, look forward to seeing them out. And Adam, thank you very much for your time.
And I'm actually happily surprised you didn't ask me for a prediction.
Well, you said it was a 50-50 fight. So I thought, well, you know what? You've mentioned that now. You're not going to give me one, I guess, but please do.
Knowing what I know, but also looking at the downside as well, I think Joe's going to make it difficult for Dubois to catch him. And I can see Joe winning by stoppage.
Well, that is refreshing. You know, so many people in this game will refuse to give a prediction, but I appreciate that. And I tell you that I'm sure when this fight obviously has been, like many fights, delayed for a few months, I'm sure when it came out, the odds were pretty much even. But now Daniel is not as odds on as you do get in boxing, but comfortably odds on. So I don't know. Listen, I don't know. I don't imagine the bookmakers know much, but if you're saying that, there's definitely some value in Joe Joyce.
I mean, a lot of it depends. Look, I don't know what condition Joe's in. A lot of it does depend on what condition he is in. But I'm sticking with that one.
Very interesting. Adam, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
No, nice to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.